What's up everyone and welcome back to the MMA Zone. Today, let's get started with Michael Chandler fires back at Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor was on hand to attend Bellator's latest card in Dublin on Saturday, and the promotion went out of its way to highlight that fact. Well, it certainly looks like the man who was supposed to fight him this month, Michael Chandler, wasn't too thrilled to see Notorious at the event. As you surely know by now, McGregor was supposed to battle Chandler at UFC 303 on June 29th. But after it was announced that the massive star wasn't going to attend the June 3rd press conference in Dublin, it was eventually reported that McGregor broke a toe and can no longer compete. Well, after seeing McGregor show up at the 3 Arena in Dublin, where the presser was supposed to go down, Chandler posted this snarky comment. Speaking of showing up to events, glad you finally made it to the 3 Arena where the press conference was supposed to be June 3rd. Sweet slippers. Who's the Bellator tick now? Now, sure, McGregor's booster will likely argue that the reason he didn't attend the presser at the juncture was because he didn't want to reveal he was injured, in case the fight still proceeded. But chances are, Dana White and the UFC brass weren't doing cartwheels either after seeing McGregor show up at a Bellator card. In fact, there's already discussion and debate online as to whether McGregor doing so could be his way of sending a message to the UFC. Was Conor pressured to still fight at UFC 303 regardless of his injury? Or could contract talks not be going well? And was this another way for Conor to remind the UFC of how he could generate mountains of buzz for other promotions if and when he ever reaches free agency? But what do you think? Was this just Conor McGregor wanting to watch some of his fellow Irish fighters compete? It's not the first time he showed up for a Bellator event in Ireland. Or was there more at play here? Up next, Bo Nickal and Shara go back and forth. It remains to be seen who and when Sharabuddin Magomedov will fight next, following his latest victory at UFC Saudi Arabia. But if Bo Nickal gets his way, he'll be next for Shara. It's not entirely clear if the Dagestani fighter is going to really push for that fight. Magomedov took on Antonio Tricoli at Saturday's event and proceeded to finish Tricoli with a series of strikes in round 3. The victory was Magomedov's second in the UFC, as the highly touted middleweight recorded a decision victory over Bruno Silva last October in what was Bullet's octagon debut. Well, following Magomedov's latest win, Nickal proceeded to call the undefeated fighter out via social media. "Give me Bullet." That prompted Magomedov to post this response, which someone could definitely argue was his way of saying he's not too interested in fighting the ridiculously accomplished wrestler. But during Magomedov's post-fight presser, he was asked about Nickal's call-out and whether he might be interested in fighting the American. Bullet said this.
Да, Бо Никал это интересный соперник, interesting fight, interesting opponent, this good wrestling. Wrestling now mean no problem. I'm from Dagestan, you know, brother, Russian man, Iceman, no problem. Wrestling, takedown, no problem. Dangerous damage, elbow, knee, let's go.
So, based on those comments, it sounds like Bullet would be willing to face Nickal if the UFC wants to move forward with that matchup. Of course, on paper, there's a lot to like about having two of the game's top rising middleweights square off. The bigger question is, will the UFC go that route? And if they're interested in the fight, where would it take place? Why is that even a topic of conversation? Well, if you followed Magomedov, you know it's not entirely clear yet if he could get cleared to fight in the US. Case in point, following UFC Saudi Arabia, White was asked that very question.
Kenny?
Yes.
Probably not. We'll keep him out here.
A key reason many questioned whether Bullet would be allowed to fight in the United States is because he reportedly only has vision in his left eye. Most state commissions will not allow fighters with vision in one eye to compete. So even if the UFC wanted to book Magomedov versus Nickal, would the latter be interested in heading overseas for the fight? It's possible. But the UFC may elect to get Nickal on bigger pay-per-view events here in the US. Now, let's look at Ian Garry disrespects Michael Page. Michael Venom Page arrived in the UFC with a fair bit of buzz on account of the highlight reel he put together while competing for Bellator. But the next man to face him, Ian Machado Garry, continues to scoff at the idea that Page is going to test him. Or for that matter, that MVP will be a force in the UFC's welterweight division. If you followed Bellator over the years, then you know that Venom recorded several jaw-dropping finishes during his time with the promotion, and that included him smashing the face of Evangelista Cyborg Santos with the nasty, look away kids, knee. But ever since it was announced that Garry is going to fight Page at UFC 303 June 29th, the Irish star made it clear he doesn't think much of Venom. So much so, Garry's repeatedly acknowledged he was never interested in fighting the vaunted striker. Recently, Garry spoke with the New York Post, and he had this to say about Page and his run with Bellator.
I have zero interest in fighting MVP. I had zero interest then, I have zero interest now. I did it to fight on the same card as Conor. And people give him hype. People give him, he's this, he's done that. He never won a world title at Bellator. And he's had 2 opportunities to do it. And now he's coming to the UFC, which is the greatest organization in fighting. And he thinks he's going to come into this division and do what? Win a world title? He couldn't do it at Bellator, and he thinks he's going to do it here. He's not going to touch me, and he's not going to touch anyone above me in the rankings. This is the end of his career. I'm 10 years young, 11 years younger than him. I'm faster than him. I'm prettier than him. I'm more technical than him. And in every single which way, I'm going to outclass him, and I'm going to prove that there is levels to this game.
So it's going to be really interesting to see if Garry can walk the walk here, and if he can truly outclass Page. Garry would be wise to not underestimate a guy who has put away plenty of opponents to date. But is Garry just talking smack like this just to get in Page's head? Or does he truly believe Venom won't touch him at UFC 303? Brian Ortega leaks huge UFC fight. Brian Ortega recently agreed to help bolster the lineup for UFC 303 by agreeing to fight Diego Lopez. But since then, T-City had an interesting scoop about another very interesting fight at 145. Following the news that Conor McGregor won't fight at UFC 303 anymore, one of the new fights booked for the card was Ortega versus Lopez. As the fight approaches, Ortega is ranked number 3 in the division, so a win over the rising Lopez will keep him in the title shot mix. For a little while now, the expectation has been that Max Holloway will be next for the new featherweight king Ilia Topuria. When Ortega was asked by Shaquille Majuri recently to weigh in on the rumored fight, T-City revealed he's heard that matchup is signed.
I think that fight's gonna be I think that fight's already made. I heard that fight's already made, let's just say it that way, from what I heard, but I could be wrong.
Ortega's comments here are interesting, given that there's been talk online the UFC is hoping to have Topuria fight Holloway at the promotion's upcoming show at the Sphere in Las Vegas. That card will take place on September 14th during Mexican Independence Day weekend. The main event for that card, which has a ton of buzz around it, has yet to be announced. Tom Aspinall prediction for Belal Muhammad versus Leon Edwards. Tom Aspinall expects to see his buddy Leon Edwards have his hand raised at UFC 304 next month, but the UFC interim heavyweight champ believes that the man who will face Edwards, Belal Muhammad, doesn't get the respect he's due. Muhammad will finally fight for the title at the July 27th event. After putting together an impressive 10-fight undefeated streak, the Chicago fighter entrenched his case for a title shot back in May by recording a unanimous decision win over longtime welterweight contender Gilbert Burns. Well, recently, Aspinall spoke with the MMA Zone. When he was asked to make his call for the upcoming fight, the rising British star had this to say.
I actually think that Belal Muhammad is very underrated. I think he's really good. But I think Leon's just better. Simple as that. I think that Leon's just going to shut him down. Leon has got some really, really clean technique. His fight IQ is so high. And I would say that Leon would win with a late stoppage. I would imagine 4th or 5th round TKO.
If you look at the current betting odds, it's clear that the consensus seems to be with Aspinall here, as far as Rocky retaining the welterweight crown next month. But to Aspinall's point, it would be silly to write Belal off as a legit contender, even if Edwards was outstriking him in their 2021 fight, before it was called due to an eye poke Belal incurred. In fact, 2 of them. After all, not only has Muhammad defeated the aforementioned Burns, he's also scored victories over Sean Brady, Stephen Thompson, and Vicente Luque since he faced Edwards. Now, let's discuss Kelvin Gastelum receives backlash for weight miss. Kelvin Gastelum picked up a pivotal victory at UFC Saudi Arabia by recording a decision win over the always dangerous Daniel Rodriguez. But the former tough winner almost certainly wishes he was making headlines for that reason, rather than because of his weight. A few days out from UFC Saudi Arabia, it was revealed that Gastelum versus Rodriguez was going to be at middleweight and not welterweight as originally contracted. Gastelum reported he had issues during his training camp, and that's why he couldn't make 170. Rodriguez, however, let it be known that he wasn't too happy about the late change. Well, given Gastelum's well-documented issues cutting weight in the past, which ultimately led to him fighting at 185 for several years, Dana White was asked to comment on the situation afterward. The UFC boss man reported this.
I don't know. I'm not thrilled with Kelvin Gastelum right now. This guy's missed weight like 3 times in his career. You got kids taking fights on a week notice, jumping off cards, coming over here and making weight, and Kelvin doesn't make weight. It's extremely disappointing.
Michael Bisping, who was calling the fight, also let Gastelum have it. During the post-fight show, the Count said this: Rodriguez wanted to weigh in at 170 pounds, whereas Gastelum clearly wasn't doing that throughout the training camp. So therefore, you're stronger, you're more athletic, you recover from your training sessions quicker, and you come into the fight stronger and heavier. But Kelvin Gastelum, regarding the weight situation, should be ashamed of himself. Now, Gastelum did apologize profusely for missing weight after the fight, but it would be pretty shocking if we see him competing at welterweight next time out. Ikram Aliskerov breaks silence on UFC loss. Ikram Aliskerov had his winning streak snapped in very violent and emphatic fashion at UFC Saudi Arabia. But the middleweight isn't rethinking his decision to step up and fight Robert Whittaker on Saturday. Aliskerov had been preparing to fight Andre Muniz last weekend, but after Muniz had to withdraw, Antonio Tricoli was booked to fight Aliskerov instead. The Russian fighter was thrown another curveball, however, as the UFC called him up after Khamzat Chimaev had to drop out of the Whittaker fight due to illness. Well, as noted, Aliskerov was quickly taken out by the Reaper in the card's headliner. But when asked if he now regrets taking the fight with the former champ, Aliskerov said this.
А сами вы думаете, если я отказался бы, потом всю жизнь думал бы, а если бы я тогда с Whittaker'ом подрался бы, что было бы, кто знает, что будет. Поэтому мы бойцы, мы спортсмены, мы должны быть готовы ко всему. Но, опять-таки, впредь будем иметь в виду, да, все риски, все моменты будем смотреть, делать анализ.
In addition, the 31-year-old also shared this comment via social media. Alhamdulillah, no excuses. I don't regret anything. It was a big experience against one of the best in the sport. I'm young, I'll work on my mistakes, learn, and get back into business soon. Thanks to everyone for support messages. You know what they say, hindsight is always 20/20, and if Aliskerov had managed to beat Bobby Knuckles, he would have leaped up the middleweight rankings. It'll be interesting to see whether Aliskerov can rebound from this defeat, but don't be shocked if we see him ranked in the top 15 by mid-next year. Alex Pereira sends a message to Israel Adesanya about facing him as an opponent in the future. This is what Poatan had to say. No, I wouldn't go back to middleweight to face Israel Adesanya. I don't even think I can make 185 pounds anymore. Plus, I feel super motivated at light heavyweight. If there were talks about another match with him, it would have to be at light heavyweight. Top comments. I was wondering why there weren't any women fights last night. Then I realized it was in Saudi just now. Sergey shows poor sportsmanship, can't take a loss and probably won't learn from that. I see him on a streak of losses from here. I love it when veterans spoil the UFC plans. Way to go, Robert. Big Sergey Pavlovich ain't the same since getting derailed by Thomas the Tank Engine.